Chapter 1. The Golden Ticket to Hell. The air inside the C-130 transport plane tasted like recycled sweat and false hope. Brock, the bull Carson, sat strapped into a jump seat, his massive frame straining against the nylon webbing. Across from him, Jade, the Siren Rivers, was filing a nail with a piece of sharpened plastic sheet smuggled out of the California State Pen. "Eyes up, bull," Jade purred, her voice cutting through the roar of the engines. "You look like you're about to shit a brick. This is parole. Smile for the cameras." "Parole don't usually involve a blindfold and a 4-hour flight to nowhere, Siren," Brock growled. He looked down the line at the other 98 pieces of human garbage. He saw Liam the liar, O'Reilly twitching in his seat, and Marcus, the machete, Smith staring at the floor with the cold, dead eyes of a man who had forgotten how to feel. A voice crackled over the intercom, slick and corporate. "Congratulations, candidates. You have reached the final phase of the rehabilitation initiative. In 5 minutes, the cargo doors will open. You are in the Mojave sector. Your goal is simple. Reach the sanctuary. Prove your worth. Your freedom is waiting." The floor groaned. Light flooded the cabin, a blinding, white-hot desert glare that made Brock squint. The inmates unbuckled, shoving each other toward the edge. There was no parachute, just a steep ramp leading down to a salt flat. "Move it, you fucking animals." Grady Gunswell screamed, shoving a smaller inmate out the back. Brock stepped off the ramp and hit the sand. It wasn't just a desert, it was a ghost town. In the distance, he saw a dilapidated gas station with a flickering neon sign and a rows of plywood houses that looked like a sick parody of the suburbs. "Where's the parole board?" Nina Nightshade Brown asked, shielding her eyes. "There's no board, sweetheart," Jade said, dropping her nail file and picking up a heavy rusted pipe from the sand. "Look at the perimeter." High above the valley, shimmering heat waves distorted massive, electrified fences capped with automated turrets. This wasn't a test. It was a cage. Chapter 2. The First Drop of Blood. The 100 inmates stood in the center of the town square, a dusty crossroads between a Sunoco station and a boarded-up supermarket. The heat was already north of 100 degrees. "All right, listen up." Marcus, the machete Smith, stepped forward, his military posture commanding the crowd. "We need to find water, and we need to find it." A wet, guttural shriek cut him off. It didn't sound human. It sounded like a throat full of gravel and broken glass. From the shadows of the abandoned supermarket, a figure stumbled out. It wore the tattered remains of a park ranger uniform, but its skin was a bruised, necrotic gray. Half its jaw hung by a single tendon, swinging like a pendulum as it sprinted. Not shuffled, but sprinted toward the nearest inmate. "What the fuck is that?" "Derek the Dagger," King yelled, reaching for a shiv in his waistband. The creature slammed into a young thief from Ohio, its teeth sinking instantly into the man's jugular. Blood sprayed in a rhythmic, hot fountain, soaking the sand. The inmate didn't even have time to scream before the thing began tearing strips of meat from his shoulder. "Zombies!" Liam the liar gasped, backing away. "You've got to be kidding me. This is some sick TV show bullshit." "Does that look like makeup to you, Liam?" Brock yelled, pointing at the second and third creatures emerging from the gas station. "Grab a weapon or die." Chaos erupted. The parolees weren't a team. They were a bag of rats. Vanessa Venom, Gray immediately tripped a slower inmate, using him as bait to buy herself time to run toward the houses. "The gas station." Rita Ripper Morales shouted, pointing toward a rack of tire irons and rusted machetes visible through the shop window. "Get to the steel. If you don't have a blade, you're just a snack." Brock didn't wait. He put his head down and charged, his massive shoulders clearing a path through the panicked crowd. He reached the gas station door just as a gray-skinned woman in a sundress lunged at him. He didn't flinch. He grabbed her by the throat and slammed her head into the brick wall until it popped like a rotten melon. "Welcome to the desert, motherfuckers," Brock spat, wiping gray brain matter off his knuckles. "Survival starts now." The chaos at the gas station is only the beginning. As the sun begins to dip, casting long, jagged shadows over the faux suburbs, the reality of survive or die sets in. The weak are already being harvested, and the strong are starting to show their teeth. Chapter 3. The Supermarket Sweep. While Brock held the gas station, Marcus, the machete Smith led a desperate charge toward the megamart at the end of the block. He knew the rule of the desert. Water was more valuable than gold, and the supermarket was the only place likely to have it in bulk. Form a wedge, Marcus roared, his voice booming with military authority. Don't stop for the ones who fall. Beside him, Cassandra Clutch. Mills moved with fluid, frantic grace. She wasn't a fighter, but she could see the angles. She spotted a group of 3 zombies, walkers. Liam had already started calling them, blocking the main sliding doors. Marcus, the loading dock! She screamed over the sound of tearing flesh. The front is a death trap. She was right. A dozen inmates had already tried the front doors, only to be swarmed by a pack of undead lurking behind the checkout counters. The glass was smeared with crimson handprints. They pivoted, sprinting around the side of the corrugated metal building. Zainzero Hawkins was already there, laughing as he watched a zombie struggle to climb a chain-link fence. Zane didn't have a weapon. He had a flare gun he'd snatched from the plane's emergency kit. Hey, machete, check this out. Zane grinned and fired. The magnesium flare buried itself in the chest of a bloated, undead butcher standing by the dock. The creature didn't scream. It just ignited, turning into a walking bonfire. You idiot! You'll burn the whole supply down. Marcus snarled, kicking the dock door open. Inside, the smell was worse than the heat. It was the scent of canned peaches mixed with rotting entrails. The aisles were stocked, but the shadows were deep. Somewhere in the back, near the dairy section, something heavy was dragging its feet. Grab the water, the canned protein, and any blades from the kitchen aisle, Marcus ordered. If it moves and it isn't breathing, take its head off. Chapter 4. The Viper's Nest. Back at the gas station, the power hummed to life with a sickening mechanical groan. The game masters were watching. A television screen behind the grease-stained counter flickered on, showing a live feed of the supermarket massacre. Clyde Viper, Watson watched the screen with a thin, predatory smile. He wasn't interested in the fighting. He was interested in the math. 100 started. 82 remained. Brock's got the gas. Marcus has the food. Clyde whispered to Tamara, Toxic Jones, which means we're the ones in the middle, darling. I don't plan on being in the middle for long, Clyde, Tamara replied, wiping a splash of black ichor from her designer jeans. She had spent the last hour convincing 3 of the younger, terrified inmates that she was their only hope for protection. We need a sanctuary. The houses on the hill. They have fences. They have sightlines. But they're empty, Clyde countered. No se place. That's why we let the bull and the machete do the heavy lifting, Tamara smirked. We wait until they've gathered the loot. Then we play them against each other. Brock is a blunt instrument. Marcus is a dinosaur. We're the new world, Clyde. Their conversation was interrupted by a crash. Liam the liar came sprinting into the station, his face pale. They're coming. The ones from the houses. Liam gasped. They aren't like the ones in the store. They're faster. They're coming from the residential zone. Outside, the streetlights began to flicker on, one by one. But they weren't white. They were a deep, ominous red. The night phase had begun. From the darkness of the suburban cul-de-sacs, dozens of glowing eyes reflected the crimson light. Lock the shutters. Brock bellowed, grabbing a heavy wrench. Toxic, Viper, get off your asses. If that door fails, we're all fucking dog meat. The first blow hit the reinforced glass, so hard the frame rattled. It wasn't a hand, it was a head. A zombie had literally thrown itself at the building. Then came another, and another. The sound of cracking glass filled the small room, a countdown to a feast. The crimson glow of the streetlights turned the desert, sand into a lake of blood. The game was no longer about parole. It was about who was willing to become a monster to survive the monsters. Chapter 5. The House on the Hill. The gas station was a tomb in the making. Brock the bull realized at the moment the second reinforced pane spiderwebbed. We're leaving, he roared, swinging his massive wrench into the skull of a creature trying to squeeze through the gap. The supermarket group has the food, but we need high ground. Tamara Toxic Jones didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed a bag of road flares and her 3 disciples, terrified kids who looked at her like she was a saint, to the residential block, the 2-story house with the stone wall. They burst out the back service door, sprinting through an alleyway choked with trash and the stench of decay. Behind them, the gas station was swarmed. The sound of metal groaning and glass shattering followed them like a death knell. They reached the house, a full McMansion built of cheap wood and sturdy stone facing. It sat on a slight rise, giving them a view of the entire twisted arena. Marcus, the machete, and his crew were already there, dragging crates of canned goods up the driveway. "This is our spot, Smith," Brock bellowed, lunging up the porch steps. "The hell it is," Marcus growled, leveling a blood-stained machete at Brock's chest. "My people bled for these supplies. You want in? You follow my rules. We fortify the ground floor, board the windows, and we take shifts." "Rules?" Zane Zero Hawkins laughed, stepping out from the shadows of the garage. "Look around, Sarge. The only rule is don't get eaten. I say we let the bull in. He's a big target. Better him getting chewed on than me." Reluctantly, Marcus lowered his blade. The 2 factions merged into a tense, vibrating alliance. They spent the next 3 hours tearing apart furniture to nail over the windows. The sound of hammers echoing in the night was a dinner bell for the undead. But for now, the stone wall held. Chapter 6, A Little Push. Inside the house, the air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and fear. Samantha Shark Lee, the hustler from Georgia, sat in the corner of the darkened kitchen, watching the others. She wasn't a fighter, but she knew how to spot a weak link. Liam the liar, O'Reilly, was shaking. He had a small bite mark on his forearm. Not deep, just a graze from a supermarket scuffle, but he had hidden it under his sleeve. "You're sweating, Liam," Samantha whispered, leaning in close. "And it's not just the heat." "I'm fine, Shark. Just the adrenaline," Liam hissed, pulling his sleeve down further. "If they find out, they'll toss you over the balcony," she said, her voice like silk. "But I can help you. I know where Marcus keeps the first aid kit. It has antiseptic, real strong stuff." "What do you want?" Liam asked, his eyes darting around the room. "I want that master key you lifted off the pilot," she smirked. "The one that opens the supply crates in the backyard." As Liam reached into his pocket to hand over the key, the floorboards creaked. Jackson, the Jackal Pierce, the lone shark, was standing in the doorway, his eyes narrowed. He had heard everything. "We got a bleeder," Jackson yelled, his voice echoing through the house. "O'Reilly's tagged." The room went silent. Marcus and Brock appeared instantly. Liam backed away, hands up, sobbing. "It's just a scratch. It's nothing." "In this game, nothing gets us all killed," Marcus said coldly. He looked at Brock. "Get him out of here." Brock didn't hesitate. He grabbed Liam by the throat, his massive hand nearly meeting around the man's neck. He dragged the screaming thief toward the second-story balcony. "Wait, please. I have the key." Liam shrieked. "Not anymore," Samantha said, holding up the key she had already snatched. With a grunt of effort, Brock hoisted Liam over the railing. "Go find your own parole, liar," he spat. The scream Liam let out as he hit the pavement was cut short by the sound of 20 pairs of feet rushing from the shadows. The wet, tearing sounds that followed kept everyone in the house awake for the rest of the night. It was the first execution, and it wouldn't be the last. The sun rose like a bruised plum over the desert, revealing the carnage of the night before. The red streetlights flickered out, replaced by a heat that promised to bake the remaining contestants alive. Inside the sanctuary, the tension had reached a boiling point. Chapter 7, The Iron Pharmacy. The 2 survivors' twist began to germinate in the basement of the McMansion. While the heavy hitters like Brock and Marcus argued over the remaining cans of beans upstairs, 2 people stayed in the shadows. Leo, a quiet, stuttering librarian from Ohio, and Sarah, a 19-year-old who had been locked up for high-end cyber espionage. They were the weak ones, the ones the others assumed would be dead by noon. "They're going to kill each other before the zombies even breach the door," Sarah whispered, her fingers flying over a tablet she'd salvaged from a dead guard's belt. "The game isn't just about surviving the dead, Leo. It's about the inventory. Look, she turned the screen. She had hacked into the city's internal grid. A map showed a hidden bunker beneath the local pharmacy, 2 blocks over. It wasn't just medicine. It was a localized armory. "WWI, tell me?" Leo asked, hugging his knees to his chest. "Because you're the only one here who doesn't have a god complex," Sarah snapped. "The bull will use you as a human shield. Marcus will sacrifice you for a strategic retreat. If we want to live, we need those supplies first." Upstairs, the mean contestants were forming a raiding party. Cassandra Clutch Mills had found a map of her own, but hers was a physical one, ripped from the wall of the gas station. "The pharmacy," Clutch announced to the group. "It's got the antibiotics. If we don't get them, the infections from the scratches will turn half of us by tonight. We move in 10 minutes. If you can't keep up, you stay behind." Vanessa Venom Gray looked at the small group. She saw the fear in their eyes and smiled. "I'll take the rear," she volunteered. It was the perfect position to decide who lived and who accidentally tripped into the path of a lurker. Chapter 8. The Price of Medicine. The trek to the pharmacy was a gauntlet of gore. The streets were littered with the half-eaten remains of the inmates who hadn't made it to a house. Zane Zero Hawkins led the way, swinging a heavy chain he'd found in the garage. He didn't just kill the zombies they encountered. He toyed with them, laughing as he shattered their kneecaps before delivering a finishing blow. "Focus, Zero," Marcus hissed. "We're exposed out here." They reached the pharmacy, a brick building with "Rehabilitation is Life" painted in ironic, peeling letters across the front. The windows were reinforced with iron bars, but the front door had been smashed inward. As they stepped into the dim, cool interior, the smell hit them, a mixture of rubbing alcohol and old blood. "Clear the aisles," Brock commanded. He swung his wrench, caving in the skull of a zombie pharmacist who was still wearing a "Hello, my name is Dave" badge. Suddenly, a high-pitched whistle echoed through the store. From behind the prescription counter, Jackson, the Jackal Pierce, emerged, holding a shotgun he'd found under the register. But he wasn't pointing it at the zombies. He was pointing it at Marcus. "Change of plans, Sarge," Jackson sneered. "This pharmacy is under new management. You want the meds, you pay the tax. I want half of the supermarket haul you've got stashed back at the house." "You greedy prick," Jade the Siren purred, her hand slipping toward the knife hidden in her thigh holster. "We're all on the same side here." "There are no sides in the desert, Siren," Jackson countered. "Just those who have the lead, and those who take it." The standoff was interrupted by a scream from the back. One of the younger inmates had wandered into the consultation room and triggered a pressure plate. A siren began to wail, a loud, piercing electronic shriek that echoed for miles across the silent desert. "You idiot!" Marcus yelled. "That's a dinner bell." From the windows, they saw them. Hundreds of shapes rising from the sand dunes and the crawl spaces of the nearby houses. The real horde had arrived, and they were hungry. The siren's wail was a physical weight, vibrating in their teeth and calling every rotting thing within 5 miles to their front door. The standoff between Jackson and Marcus shattered as the first wave of the horde slammed into the iron-barred windows of the pharmacy. Chapter 9. The Pharmacy Siege. "Kill the alarm. Somebody kill the fucking alarm." Brock screamed, his voice barely audible over the mechanical shriek. Jackson, the Jackal, didn't lower the shotgun, but his hands were shaking. The greed that had fueled his betrayal was being rapidly replaced by the primal urge to run. "It's behind the counter. The panel is locked." Sarah, watching from the shadows of a vitamin aisle with Leo, saw her opening. While the alpha contestants were focused on the doors and each other, she slipped behind the counter. Her fingers danced over the keypad. She didn't just turn off the alarm. She initiated a store lockdown sequence she'd found in the pharmacy's local server. Steel shutters began to hiss downward over the windows and doors. "What the hell is this?" Marcus yelled, diving back as a heavy iron gate nearly took his legs off. "It's a cage," Sarah whispered, though only Leo heard her. The pharmacy was now sealed. It was dark, save for the flickering green emergency lights. Outside, The sound of hundreds of dead hands clawing at the steel shutters sounded like a hailstorm. Inside, the air was quickly turning stale. "You trapped us in here, you little bitch." "Grady guns," Wells roared, lunging toward Sarah. He didn't make it. A hand reached out from the darkness of the employee-only corridor and dragged him backward. A wet, tearing sound followed, accompanied by a gurgle that ended in a sickening pop. "There's more of them in here with us," Jade the Siren whispered, her back against a shelf of gauze. They weren't outside. They were in the basement. And they're coming up. Chapter 10, The Basement Cowards. While the main group began a frantic, bloody skirmish in the dark aisles of the pharmacy, Leo and Sarah found the freight elevator. "LL Sarah, we can't leave them," Leo stammered, his eyes wide with terror as he watched Brock the bull swing his wrench into the dark, decapitating a zombie nurse. "They aren't them, Leo. They're obstacles," Sarah said coldly. She jammed a screwdriver into the elevator's control panel. "The game masters want us to fight over the scraps." But the map showed a tunnel. This pharmacy wasn't just built for meds. It's a resupply point for the guards. There's an exit that leads directly to the gas station's underground tanks. The elevator doors groaned open. Inside sat a single, bloated zombie, the former manager. Before it could lunge, Sarah didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She stepped aside and let the momentum of the elevator's descent knock the creature off balance. Then she shoved it back into the darkened pharmacy floor just as the doors hissed shut. As they descended into the cool, quiet dark of the sub-basement, the sounds of the massacre above faded. "Why me?" Leo asked again, his voice echoing in the small metal box. "I'm a librarian. I'm nothing. Because you're the only one who didn't try to use me as a shield or a toy," Sarah said, looking at the floor. "And because I need someone to carry the ammunition." The doors opened to a concrete bunker. It was filled with crates marked with the Survive or Die logo. But these weren't filled with beans or bandages. These were filled with assault rifles, tactical vests, and, most importantly, GPS trackers showing the location of every other inmate in the city. Sarah picked up a sleek, black rifle and checked the chamber with a practiced click. "The strong are upstairs dying for a bottle of aspirin," she said, a dark smile finally touching her lips. "Let's see how they handle a couple of weak survivors with a real arsenal." Above them, a muffled explosion rocked the building. The mean contestants had found the oxygen tanks. The pharmacy was about to become a chimney. The pharmacy was no longer a sanctuary. It was a pressurized cooker of fire and teeth. The air was a toxic soup of burnt hair and medical alcohol. Chapter 11, The Glass Chimney. "Move. Out the back. Now." Marcus, the machete, screamed, his lungs burning. The oxygen tanks in the rear of the pharmacy had finally detonated, sparked by a stray flare. The explosion ripped a hole through the roof, turning the store into a literal chimney. Fire roared upward, sucking the oxygen out of the room. The steel shutters Sarah had lowered were now their death warrants. They were glowing red, warping from the heat. Brock, the bull, wasn't thinking about strategy anymore. He was a cornered animal. He grabbed a heavy metal shelving unit and, with a roar of pure, adrenaline-fueled rage, used it as a battering ram against the side wall. Crunch. The faux brick gave way. A jagged hole opened to the outside world. "Everyone out." Brock bellowed, but everyone was a shrinking number. As the inmates scrambled through the hole, Vanessa Venom, Grace saw her opportunity. In the chaos of the smoke, she saw Samantha Shark, Lee stumbling over a pile of debris. Shark was clutching the master key they'd stolen from Liam earlier. Venom didn't help her up. She didn't scream. She simply stepped on Shark's ankle until she heard the bone snap, snatched the key from her hand, and disappeared into the smoke. "Venom, you bitch!" Shark shrieked, but her voice was drowned out by the hundreds of zombies waiting just outside the hole. The first few inmates out were torn apart instantly. A human buffet served through a hole in the wall, but the fire followed them out, a wall of flame that temporarily drove the horde back, allowing the alphas to sprint toward the supermarket, leaving the wounded to scream until the fire or the dead silenced them. Chapter 12, The Silent Hunters. While the leaders were running for their lives, Sarah and Leo were moving through the cool, damp darkness of the service tunnel. The weight of the tactical gear felt foreign to Leo, but Sarah moved like she was born for the apocalypse. "Check the monitor," Sarah whispered. In her hand, the GPS tablet displayed 72 glowing dots. One dot was stationary in the burning pharmacy, Samantha. It blinked out. 71. "They're heading back to the supermarket," Leo noted, his voice gaining a sliver of confidence. "But Marcus and Brock are split up." Brock took a detour through the residential zone. "He's going for the motorcycles," Sarah said, pointing to a small icon on the map. "He thinks he can outrun the game. He doesn't realize the safe zone is a moving target controlled by the directors." They reached a heavy iron grate that looked up into the floor of the Sunoco gas station. Sarah climbed the ladder and peeked through. The station was empty, save for the wreckage and the smell of spilled gasoline. "Leo, listen to me," Sarah said, turning back to him. "The game wants them to fight. It wants the strong to eat each other. We aren't going to fight them. We're going to sabotage them. We take their mobility, we take their fuel, and we let the desert do the rest." She handed Leo a small, magnetic device, a GPS jammer. "The next time the Game Master announces a supply drop, no one's gear is going to work except ours. They'll be blind in the dark." Suddenly, the overhead speakers in the city crackled to life, the corporate voice now sounding amused. "Attention, candidates. Due to the high rate of attrition, we are accelerating the schedule. The first extraction point has been revealed. It is at the water tower. There are only 2 seats on the chopper. Good luck. Survival begins now." The 71 dots on the screen suddenly surged. The piece of the tunnel was gone. The race for the only 2 seats out of hell had officially begun, and the weak survivors were already miles ahead of the pack. The pharmacy was no longer a sanctuary. It was a pressurized cooker of fire and teeth. The air was a toxic soup of burnt hair and medical alcohol. Chapter 13. High-octane blood. Brock the Bull reached the garage behind the gas station first. His chest was heaving, his shirt soaked in a mixture of his own sweat and someone else's blood. Inside the garage sat 3 heavy-duty dirt bikes and a customized chopper, their chrome glinting under the harsh midday sun. "Mine," Brock wheezed, grabbing the handlebars of the largest bike. "I don't think so, big man," a voice hissed from the rafters. Clyde Viper Watson dropped down, landing lightly on the concrete. He held a length of piano wire stretched between 2 wooden handles. Behind him, Rita Ripper Morales stepped out from behind a tool chest, swinging a heavy chain tipped with a sharpened gear. "You're too heavy for a bike, Brock," Viper sneered. "You'll just sink in the dunes. Give us the keys, and maybe we'll let you run behind us." Brock didn't waste breath on a comeback. He charged. The fight was a blur of brutal, unrefined power versus calculated cruelty. Ripper swung the chain, the gear catching Brock in the shoulder, ripping through muscle and bone. He roared, ignoring the pain, and caught the chain in his massive hand. With a jerk of his arm, he pulled Ripper toward him and delivered a headbutt that shattered her orbital bone. As Ripper fell, Viper moved in. He looped the piano wire around Brock's thick neck, pulling tight. Brock's face turned a deep, bruised purple. He clawed at his throat, his boots scuffing the concrete. "Die, you fucking ox," Viper whispered in his ear. Brock's hand fumbled on the workbench beside him, fingers closing around a heavy industrial stapler. He slammed it backward into Viper's thigh and pulled the trigger. Thwip, thwip, thwip. Steel staples buried themselves in Viper's femoral artery. Viper screamed, his grip loosening. Brock spun around, grabbed Viper by the hair, and slammed his face into the spinning rear tire of the motorcycle he'd just started. The scream was cut short by the wet spray of skin and teeth against the garage wall. Chapter 14. The Machete and the Siren. While Brock was painting the garage red, the race for the water tower had turned the main drag into a killing field. Marcus, the Machete Smith, was leading a group of 10, including Jade, the Siren Rivers. They were halfway to the tower when the Nightshade hit. Nina Nightshade Brown, who had remained silent since the plane, revealed her hand. She had found the chemical shed behind the supermarket. As Marcus's group crossed the open plaza, she threw several glass jars filled with the pressurized, caustic gas. "Gas! Mask up!" Marcus yelled. But most of his men didn't have masks. They fell to their knees, clutching their throats as the skin on their faces began to blister. Through the green haze, Nina moved like a ghost, a scalpel in each hand, darting between the blinded inmates and opening their jugulars with surgical precision. Marcus swung his machete blindly, catching Nina in the ribs, but she slipped away into the fog. "Jade, where are you?" Marcus roared, coughing blood. "Right here, honey." Jade's voice came from behind him. He felt the cold steel of her knife slide between his ribs. He gasped, his knees hitting the hot asphalt. He looked up to see Jade standing over him, wearing a gas mask she had stolen from a dead guard hours ago. "You were a good shield, Marcus," she purred, her voice muffled by the rubber mask. "But there are only 2 seats, and I'm not sharing mine with a dinosaur." She twisted the blade. Marcus, the machete smith, the man everyone feared, collapsed into the dust, his eyes staring at the water tower he would never reach. From a rooftop nearby, Sarah watched through the scope of her sniper rifle. She didn't fire. She didn't have to. The alphas were doing her work for her. 19 left, Sarah whispered into her comms to Leo. "The herd is thin. Move to the base of the tower. It's time to set the trap." The sun was a dying ember on the horizon, turning the desert into a graveyard of long, jagged shadows. The 2 seats announcement had turned the city into a meat grinder, and the gears were starting to jam with the bodies of the fallen. Chapter 15, The Ghost in the Machine. Jade the Siren stood over Marcus's cooling corpse, wiping her blade on her cargo pants. She looked toward the water tower, a rusted iron titan rising 300 feet above the sand. She wasn't alone. Brock the bull was limping toward the same goal, his shoulder a mangled mess of red pulp, clutching a stolen shotgun like a holy relic. "You look like shit, Brock," Jade called out, her voice echoing in the eerie silence of the plaza. "Better than Marcus," Brock spat, nodding at the body at her feet. "Where's the rest of your fan club?" "Dead. Or dying," she shrugged. "Saves us the trouble of sharing." Suddenly, every electronic speaker in the city emitted a high-frequency squeal. The red street lights didn't just flicker. They turned to violent, pulsing violet. "What the fuck is this?" Brock growled, leveling his shotgun at the shadows. A voice, not the corporate announcer, but a younger, sharper voice, cut through the noise. It was Sarah. "You think you're the predators because you're loud, because you're cruel. But in a system this complex, the apex predator isn't the one with the biggest teeth. It's the one who controls the data." The giant LED billboard overlooking the square, which had been flickering with survive or die logos, suddenly changed. It showed a live feed of Brock and Jade from a drone hovering directly above them. Overlaid on their images were red targets and a countdown, 00:60. "We've locked the internal pressure valves of the water main beneath your feet," Sarah's voice continued, cold and detached. "In 60 seconds, the gas line you're standing on is going to equalize. I suggest you start climbing. Or don't. The game needs a finale, and a fireworks show sounds perfect." "You little bitch," Jade screamed, looking around frantically for the source of the audio. "I'll peel the skin off your face." "Climb, Siren," Sarah whispered. "The floor is about to become lava." Chapter 16, The Iron Ascent. The base of the water tower was a tangle of rusted pipes and a single, narrow spiral staircase. Brock and Jade reached it at the same time, shoving each other aside in a desperate scramble for the first step. Boom! The ground behind them erupted. A massive plume of fire and sand shot into the air as the gas lines Sarah had manipulated finally blew. The shockwave threw them both against the iron legs of the tower. "Go! Go!" Brock roared, shoving Jade upward, not out of kindness, but because her body was a shield against the heat rising from below. As they climbed, the reality of the secret land became clear. From the height of the first landing, they could see beyond the city walls. There was no Mojave Desert. There were no lights of Las Vegas on the horizon. Beyond the electrified fences was a vast, black void, a simulated abyss that suggested they weren't in Nevada at all. They were in a high-tech vacuum, a playground for the world's sickest billionaires. "Look," Jade pointed upward. Halfway up the tower, 2 figures were already moving. They weren't sprinting. They were moving with tactical precision. It was the librarian and the girl. They were wearing body armor and carrying suppressed rifles. Leo, the stuttering kid. Brock gasped, his lungs burning from the ascent. And the tech brat. Leo looked down over the railing. The terror that had defined his face for years was gone, replaced by a grim, focused exhaustion. He didn't say a word. He simply dropped a localized flashbang grenade. The world turned white. Jade screamed as the blinding light seared her retinas. She lost her footing, her hand slipping from the railing. She dangled over the abyss, 300 feet of empty air screaming for her. Brock reached out, but not to save her. He grabbed the master key she had stolen from Venom earlier, snatching it from her belt as she slipped. "Thanks for the ticket, Siren," Brock grunted. With a final, jagged scream, Jade the Siren Rivers fell. She didn't hit the ground. She hit the wall of fire still raging at the base. Brock didn't watch her burn. He looked up. Leo and Sarah were almost at the top. He racked the slide of his shotgun. "You kids want to play hero? Let's see how you handle a villain who won't die." The metal of the tower groaned under the heat of the inferno below. Brock the Bull Carson was no longer a man. He was a machine of scarred meat and pure, unadulterated spite. Each step he took up the spiral staircase left a smeared handprint of blood on the rusted railing. Chapter 17. The Apex of the Damned. The top of the water tower was a flat, circular platform whipped by a synthetic wind that smelled of ozone and scorched earth. Sarah and Leo stood near the edge, the wind tugging at their tactical vests. Behind them, the extraction helicopter wasn't a helicopter at all. It was a sleek, matte black VTOL craft, silent and predatory, hovering just inches off the deck. The hatch of the tower's access point blew outward. Brock emerged, his shotgun leveled, his eyes bloodshot and wild. You little shits," Brock wheezed, the gore from his shoulder dripping onto the metal grating. "You think a few gadgets make you kings of the hill? I've survived 3 riots and a death row hit. I'm taking that seat." "There is no taking, Brock," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the rifle trembling slightly in her hands. The game was never about strength. It was about adaptability. You're a relic, a dinosaur in a digital cage. "Shut the fuck up," Brock roared, firing a shell. The blast caught Leo in the side, the ceramic plate in his vest shattering and throwing him backward against of Toll's landing gear. Leo gasped, clutching his ribs, his face contorted in agony. "Leo!" Sarah screamed, turning her rifle toward Brock. But Brock was faster than his bulk suggested. He charged, using the shotgun as a club. He swung it with a sickening thud against Sarah's temple, sending her spinning to the deck. He stood over them, a towering mountain of vengeance. "Parole!" Brock chuckled, a dark, wet sound. "I'm going to find the suit who ran this show, and I'm going to feed him his own teeth." He stepped toward the open hatch of the VTOL, but a red light began to pulse on the craft's doorway. A holographic interface shimmered into existence, showing a face, a man in a crisp, white suit sitting in a mahogany-lined office. "Candidate 001, the man said, his voice smooth as silk. "Impressive, truly, but you've missed a fine print." Chapter 18. The board's final verdict. Brock froze, his hand on the frame of the craft. "Who the fuck are you? Get this bird in the air." "I am the chairman," the hologram replied. "And you are correct, Brock. This is a secret land. You aren't in the desert. You are currently 3 miles beneath the surface of the South China Sea, in a pressurized dome owned by the Sovereign Asset Group. The zombies, a biological byproduct of our life extension research. You were the test subjects for the security protocols." Brock's eyes went wide. He looked at the horizon again. The sky flickered, a pixelated glitch revealing the massive, curved ceiling of a subterranean cavern. "Now, about that parole," the chairman continued. "The terms stated that the survivors would be granted freedom. But freedom is a relative term. To us, freedom means being freed from the burden of your criminal record, permanently." Suddenly, the floor of the VTOL didn't offer a seat. It retracted. A series of automated turrets slid out from the belly of the craft, their sensors locking onto Brock's heat signature. "Wait!" Brock screamed, reaching for his shotgun. Evaluation complete, the chairman said. Subject 001, too volatile for extraction. Subject 088 and 092, potential for recruitment. The turrets hummed. Brock didn't even have time to curse before the high-caliber round shredded him, his massive body being tossed off the tower like a rag doll into the fire below. The chairman's gaze shifted to Sarah and Leo, who were huddled together on the deck, shivering. "Congratulations, children," the voice said, now sounding almost fatherly. "You've passed the first round of the internship. Now, would you like to see the rest of the facility? Or shall we let the walkers up the stairs?" Leo looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at the dark corridor of the VTOL. There was no new life waiting for them, only a different kind of cage. "Get in," Sarah whispered, pulling Leo toward the ship. "We survive now. We kill them later." The VTOL didn't rise toward the sun. It dived into a massive pressurized shaft that smelled of ozone and expensive antiseptic. As the hatch sealed, the screams of the remaining few left on the tower were cut off by the hum of advanced aeronautics. Chapter 19, The Belly of the Beast. The interior of the craft was a cathedral of white light and cold steel. Sarah sat on a bench, clutching her side where a bruise was blooming like a dark flower. Leo sat across from her, staring at his hands. They were stained with the dust of the simulated desert and the blood of men who had wanted them dead. "You're thinking about the library," Sarah said, her voice sounding hollow in the pressurized cabin. "I'm thinking about the fact that I'm a murderer," Leo stammered. "I pushed the button, Sarah. I watched them burn. You chose to breathe. Don't apologize for that." The craft docked with a jolt. The door slid open to reveal a hangar larger than a football stadium. Hundreds of men and women in gray tactical jumpsuits moved with robotic efficiency. These weren't inmates. They were the cleaners. A woman stepped forward, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail so tight it looked painful. She wore a badge that read Commander Vance. "Welcome to the Sovereign Asset Group," Vance said, her eyes scanning them with the clinical detachment of someone inspecting livestock. "You've proven you can survive a playground. Now we see if you can survive the real world. You are no longer inmates. You are assets in training. If you fail a single metric, you go back into the dome as the bait." "What's the job?" Sarah asked, standing up straight. Vance smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "The world thinks the zombie virus is a disaster. We know it's a market. You're going to help us manage the supply." Chapter 20, The Cleaner's Creed. For the next 2 weeks, the rehabilitation became a nightmare of a different sort. Sarah and Leo were separated. Sarah was put into strategic intelligence, where she was forced to monitor the next batch of 100 inmates, mostly political dissidents and low-level criminals, as they were dropped into a different simulation, a flooded urban landscape. Leo was sent to field maintenance. His job was to go into the domes after a game ended and reset the board. The first time Leo stepped back into the desert dome, the smell hit him like a physical blow. The fires had been extinguished, but the bodies remained. He wore a biohazard suit, carrying a high-powered incinerator. "Clean it up, 092. A guard barked through his helmet comms. Leo walked toward the water tower. At the base, he saw the charred remains of Jade. Further out, he found what was left of Marcus, the machete. But it was when he reached the gas station that his heart stopped. Underneath a pile of rubble, a hand moved. It wasn't a zombie. It was Zane Zero Hawkins. He had crawled into a grease pit to survive the fire. He was burned, half-blind, and coughing up gray soot. But he was alive. Leo. Zane wheezed, recognizing the silhouette. "Help me, please. I'll do anything." Leo looked at the guard standing 50 yards away, distracted by a tablet. Then he looked at the incinerator in his hand. If he helped Zane, he was dead. If he killed him, he was exactly what the chairman wanted him to be. "I'm sorry, Zane," Leo whispered, but he didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he kicked a heavy piece of corrugated metal over the pit, hiding the opening. "Stay quiet," Leo hissed into the darkness. "I'm coming back for you. We're going to burn this whole place down." He turned away and fired the incinerator at a nearby pile of trash, creating enough smoke to mask his conversation. For the first time, Leo wasn't just surviving, he was infiltrating. The transition from prey to predator was complete, but the battlefield had shifted from sand and blood to silicon and shadows. Inside the Sovereign Asset Group's command center, the air was chilled to protect the servers, a stark contrast to the blistering hell of the dome. Chapter 21, The God in the Glass. Sarah sat in a darkened terminal, her eyes reflecting rows of scrolling green code. To the guards, she was just another asset cataloging casualty rates. In reality, she was a digital ghost, drifting through the company's encrypted backdoors. She finally cracked the chairman's private directory. The file wasn't labeled with a name, but a coordinate: 37.2431 degrees north, 115.7930 degrees west. Area 51, she whispered to herself. The documents didn't describe a government official. The chairman wasn't a man, he was an AI, a predictive algorithm named Kronos, designed to solve global overpopulation by harvesting the unwanted. The Sovereign Asset Group was just a front. The secret land was a massive, subterranean factory where the inmates weren't just being tested. Their neurological responses to fear were being mapped to program a new generation of autonomous hunter-killer drones. They aren't looking for survivors, Sarah realized, her blood running cold. They're looking for the perfect fear code. A shadow fell over her shoulder. It was Commander Vance. "Finding what you're looking for, Sarah." Vance's voice was like a razor. Sarah didn't flinch. She closed the tab and looked up. "I was just wondering why the mortality rate for the next drop is projected at 100%. If everyone dies, there's no one left to recruit." "The recruitment phase is over," Vance said, leaning in close. "We have you and the librarian. You're the gold standard. Now, we just need to see how you handle a controlled stress event within the staff." Vance tapped her baton against the desk. "Report to Sector 4. It's time for your performance review." Chapter 22, The Dome Army. While Sarah played a deadly game of chess in the clouds, Leo was in the dirt. He had become the ghost of the dome. Every time he was sent in to clear the bodies, he left behind more than he took away. In the grease pit beneath the gas station, Zane Zero, Hawkins was no longer the nihilistic joker he once was. His skin was a patchwork of scars, and his eyes burned with a cold, focused mania. He wasn't alone. Leo had found 3 others, a silent mechanic named Clutch Mills who had survived by hiding in a ventilation duct, and 2 others from the weak pile who had learned to eat the synthetic moss growing on the dome's cooling pipes. "The next drop is tonight," Leo whispered, sliding a crate of tactical sidearms and thermal detonators into the pit. 100 more people. They think they're going to a parole hearing, but this time, the walkers won't be the only thing waiting for them. "What's the signal?" Zane asked, checking the action on a stolen Glock. "The lights," Leo said. "Sarah is going to crash the grid. When the violet lights go out and the emergency red stay off, that's when you move. Don't go for the zombies. Go for the cameras. Blind the gods before you kill them." "And you?" Zane asked. "I have to get to the cleaner's locker room," Leo said, his stutter completely gone, replaced by a voice of iron. "I'm going to make sure the doors to the surface don't open for the guards. We're locking them in here with us." Leo climbed out of the pit just as a patrol drone buzzed overhead. He wiped the grease from his face and picked up his incinerator. He looked up at the sky, the curved, metallic ceiling that had been his universe. Tonight, the dome wouldn't just be a cage for the damned. It would be the tomb of the Sovereign Asset Group. The violet lights of the facility didn't just flicker, they screamed. High-frequency alarms tore through the sterile hallways of the Sovereign Asset Group as the digital virus Sarah had planted began to devour the Kronos mainframe from the inside out. Chapter 23, The Darkness is Ours. "Sarah, back away from the console," Commander Vance roared, drawing her sidearm. Sarah didn't move. Her fingers were locked onto the emergency override. "You wanted a controlled stress event. Vance? Here it is. I just opened every door in the facility. The barracks, the labs, and the dome gates. Every monster you created, human or otherwise, is free." Vance lunged, slamming the butt of her pistol into Sarah's ribs. Sarah gasped, falling to the floor, but she was smiling through the blood. Too late. The grid is dark. The power died. Total, absolute blackness swallowed the command center. A second later, the emergency lights kicked in, but they weren't the steady red of the game. They were a frantic, strobing amber. In the dome below, Zero Hawkins and his ghost army exploded from the grease pits. They didn't hunt the zombies, they hunted the sensors. With thermal detonators and stolen rifles, they blew the camera clusters and the turret mounts. For the first time in the history of the project, the gods were blind. Kill the lights, kill the masters. Zane screamed, his voice echoing through the massive cavern. The guards, panicked and unable to see through the smoke, and the flickering amber strobes, began firing blindly. They didn't realize that the zombies weren't the only things in the dark anymore. The 100 new inmates, confused, terrified, and fueled by the realization that they had been sent here to die, found the crates of weapons Leo had hidden. The prey had found their teeth. Chapter 24, The Cleaner's Revenge. Leo stood in the middle of the cleaner's locker room, a heavy tactical shotgun in his hands. He wasn't the stuttering librarian anymore. He was the gatekeeper. A squad of 10 guards, led by a high-ranking officer, scrambled toward the elevator that led to the surface. Move it. Get the chairman out before the dome breaches. The elevator is out of service, Leo said, stepping out from behind a row of lockers. 092. Get out of the way, you pathetic worm, the officer snarled, leveling his rifle. Leo didn't wait. He fired. The roar of the shotgun in the cramped locker room was deafening. The officer was thrown back into the elevator doors. The other guards scrambled for cover, but they were trapped in a bottleneck. From the shadows behind them, the walkers began to pour in through the vents Leo had opened. The screams of the guards were a mixture of terror and disbelief. They had spent months watching people die on screens. Now, the reality was sinking teeth into their throats. Leo watched them fall, his face a mask of cold stone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small remote. Sarah, I'm at the main seal. The explosives are set. Do it, Leo. Sarah's voice crackled through his earpiece, strained and breathless. Vance is down, but the AI is trying to initiate a self-destruct. We have 3 minutes to reach the surface, or we're buried here forever. Leo pressed the button. The base of the main elevator shaft, the only way out of the 3-mile-deep hellhole, erupted in a ball of orange fire. The shaft collapsed, cutting off the guard's escape, but revealing an old, forgotten maintenance ladder that led toward the surface. He began to climb. Behind him, the sound of 100 inmates and 1,000 zombies colliding in the dark was the last thing he heard as the world beneath him began to crumble. The air in the maintenance shaft was thin and tasted of rust, but as Sarah and Leo climbed, it began to change. The stale, recycled scent of the Sovereign Asset Group was replaced by something sharp, cold, and unmistakably real. The smell of rain on dry earth. Chapter 25, The First Breath. The final ladder rungs were slick with condensation. Sarah reached the top first, her muscles screaming, her vision blurred from the blow to her head. With one final, agonizing heave, she shoved the heavy steel manhole cover aside. She didn't find the South China Sea. She didn't find a secret military base. She found the sky. It was just before dawn in the high desert. The stars were still visible, indifferent and beautiful, hanging over a landscape of jagged rock and sagebrush. Sarah crawled out onto the dirt, pulling Leo up behind her. They collapsed onto the ground, their chests heaving, as the earth beneath them began to vibrate with a low, rhythmic thrum. 3 miles below, the Kronos AI had reached the end of its countdown. The ground buckled. A muffled, subsonic roar rolled under their feet like a localized earthquake. A mile away, a hidden ventilation spire belched a pillar of black smoke and fire into the morning air, and then silence. The massive dome, the secret land, the zombies, and the corporate monsters were gone, buried under millions of tons of collapsed rock. Is it over? Leo whispered. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling, but they were free. It's over, Sarah said. She reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a small, encrypted drive. But the data isn't. I downloaded the donor list. Every billionaire, every politician who paid to watch those games, the world is going to know their names by noon. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. A rusted, beat-up pickup truck slowed to a crawl on the nearby dirt road. The driver, an old man with a face like a dried apple, squinted at the two blood-stained, armored figures standing in the middle of nowhere. "You folks look like you've been through a meat grinder," the man said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Need a lift?" Sarah looked at Leo. The librarian, the weak link who had survived the bull, the machete, and the abyss, finally smiled. It wasn't the smile of a victim. It was the smile of a ghost who had walked through hell and come out the other side. "We need to get to a library," Leo said, his voice clear and steady. "A library?" the driver asked, scratching his head. "In this part of Nevada? Closest one's 50 miles out." "That's fine," Sarah said, climbing into the truck bed and pulling Leo up with her. "We've got a lot of stories to tell." As the truck rattled down the highway, the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting long, golden light over the desert. The game was over. The parole was fake. But for the two survivors riding into the light, the world was finally, brutally, and beautifully theirs.